I'm going to let you take the lead.
All right. Well, here we are, folks. It's not quite on the hour yet, so we have not yet begun. Joya, we were just talking about doing workshops for CEOs and executives. And Joya, you were mentioning one that you just worked up, a workshop. What is that workshop on?
Well, I just kicked off my newest leadership offering for this year, and my platform services executive women. So you're senior or mid-level manager, and you're on the upward trajectory. And I launched a mastermind this year. It's my first time that I'm doing this, but it really puts everything that I've been doing in the way of moderating conversations on steroids. And so when I think about that weekend, I did a whole retreat, and the amount of time, energy, money that I spent ideating around that one program, and then boom, it's done. Like that weekend is done. And so we were having an interesting conversation of like, well, that workshop could be put in front of many different audiences. It's about finding those audiences first.
Great. Well, here we are. It is now the hour that we were scheduled to begin. So if you're here watching us now, we are here to talk about 8 ways that you can improve team culture by embracing conflict. And Joya has 4 thoughts to share with you. I have 4 thoughts to share with you. That's going to bring us to 8 thoughts. So I'm very excited, Joya, that you've joined me. We have a client in common in Marianne Morrow at Ninth Gear, which, by the way, folks, absolutely fascinating company to check out. They're shortening the transition time or the funding time for foreign exchange from 48 hours to, I don't know, 48 microseconds or something like that.
Nanoseconds.
using the blockchain.
It's Venmo, but for Euro.
Yeah. So Joya, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and then tell folks about one way that they can improve culture by embracing conflict.
Absolutely. So my name is Joya. I live in New York City. And for the last 20 years, I've been a news anchor here. But on the side, I ran a women's leadership platform. And so a couple years ago, I decided to stop doing 2 things half-assed and 1 thing well. And now I just run the Women's Leadership Academy full time. And what is conflict at the end of the day? Conflict, said by another word, is anger. And what I want to do is talk for 1 second, Aaron, about what happens to your brain when you are angry, because I think that's a valid point, because conflict, of course, means that there's a lot of emotions, but anger might be the primary one. And I think this is germane to the conversation that we're having. Basically, we have 3 brains as human beings. And our oldest part of our brain, our reptilian brain, is the one that is programmed for fight or flight. So when we get angry, your adrenals are starting to pump all kinds of hormones into your system, which compromises your ability to think logically. That means that your reptilian brain has overtaken your prefrontal cortex, which is where you do all of your logical processing and your thinking and the deep thinking. So that means effectively this part of your brain is no longer in the driver's seat. The reptilian brain, which is designed to keep you from getting eaten by a lion and designed to keep you out of danger, is now in the driver's seat. So you're not really, even in scientific terms, thinking with all of your capacities at your fingertips when you get angry. So my first tip is, in order to put that prefrontal cortex back in the driver's seat and in control, is to take a break, reassess and reframe. So what does, reassess look like? You know what? I'm really upset right now. Reframe. I'm upset right now because I put a lot of work into that workshop for the weekend, and I'm having a reaction to the feedback right now. Right. So you're putting some emotional distance between yourself and your emotion that you're feeling at that time. But then you're also reframing it for the benefit of who's in the room and saying, you know what, I'm an adult here. I'm a leader here. I have other tools at my faculties besides anger. But I also need to reset the tone and timbre of the room.
So I love what you're saying. And I love that the acknowledgement, hey, I'm upset, and here's what it is. My coach reminded me recently, if you're angry, the underlying emotion is fear, right? And so you talked about the investment and essentially the fear of loss of that investment. So One of the things I think is so powerful about what you just shared is that naming the emotion, and I think the more specifically you can name the emotion, starts to diffuse that emotion. And people
Mm-hmm.
say there's no place for anger at work. And I appreciate very much, Joya, the way that you are saying, no, there is a place for anger at work. I mean, how can you not? The
I mean,
thing
we're
to do is
human
to
at the
not
end of the
direct
day.
the anger at people and to
We're
do what
human
you
at the
need
end
to
of the
do.
day.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're having a human experience. So, I think as you get further up the pyramid in the leadership chain, we should have and be much more well-oiled machines to have other tools
Mhm.
at our fingertips besides anger. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to get angry. Steve Jobs was infamous for his temper tantrums, and no one can argue with his legacy and his success. But that being said, I just think that, like, as I've learned and crawled up my way into my leadership chain, I know that there are other things I need to lean on besides anger, but I also understand what's happening in my brain and that I am effectively losing control if I'm getting angry. And I thought that was a great place to start.
I love it. So I'll take a moment to introduce myself, and then I'll tell you folks what my first thought is for you.
Yeah.
So I'm Aaron Schmookler. I'm a co-founder at the Yes Works, where we help people with what we think of as company culture engineering. There are so many interdependent forces at work in creating your culture and therefore in creating your results that they really need to be managed. All those forces need to be managed effectively so that you can have an internal cultural structure that's going to stand up to the pressures of trying to get the revenue and all of the other things that you need to do in order to have a thriving business. My first
Aaron,
thought for you folks. Oh, go ahead, Joya.
yeah, I was going to say that I think that I love that we're talking about culture because, in the backdrop of all of this, people are struggling. Business owners are struggling to retain talent, find talent, hire talent, and never more than ever has culture. In other words, what is it about the stickiness of my workplace that's going
Mm-hmm.
to keep talent, retain talent, and attract talent? So I think culture now more than ever is such an important conversation to be having.
Just heard Simon Sinek today saying, the mediocre cultures are the ones that are losing people right now, left and right, in this great resignation. It's the companies that have an excellent culture that are hanging on to people. People are not. There is no great resignation in those companies that have a great culture. So here's
Yeah.
a thought for a great culture that embraces conflict is that you've got to be deliberately and explicitly inviting dissent and negative feedback. So
Mhm.
one way, one thing that might look like to invite dissent is to say, because people often don't want to disagree with the boss, right? So you have to not only make it safe, but almost make it required. So to say something like this idea that we're kicking around right now, this plan that we're hatching, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, if this has failed, what will have sunk it? So
Mhm.
that makes it safe, not only safe but almost required. It creates a platform onto which to put dissent. A way to encourage negative feedback. If you say, "Hey, what could I be doing better?" People might say, "Ah, nothing. You're doing great," which is what I hear, fairly regularly when I ask for that. Then I say, "Okay, if there was one thing that I could have done to make it even better, or if there's, if you're speaking to somebody who's on your team, if there is one thing that I could do to be a better leader for you, what would that
Mm.
one thing be?" So invite dissent, invite negative feedback.
Another question that I think is always great in that vein, Aaron, is how can I help?
Yeah,
Asking an open-ended question like that, how can I help? Which shows that, you're not on some like big pedestal up here because you are in fact the leader. You're willing to get back down in the trenches with your direct reports and say, you know what, I'm here, but I need you to guide me in how I'm going to be more useful to you.
I
I
love it.
want to follow up on the point that you just made about as a leader inviting conflict. And I would actually second that by saying you also have to role model that you're open to having disagreements in the workplace. I
Here,
think
here.
that no better sort of, green light than the fact that you yourself are willing to get into an argument. But here's the rub. Here's the important piece. How do you make it so that everybody at the table still walks away feeling respected, that their
Mm,
ideas were respected. And so I'm going to put on my journalist hat because I think I've done this since I was a little kid and it drove my dad nuts. I love to ask questions. And even today as an adult, I love to ask questions. I genuinely want to understand what motivates you, what makes you tick. And so if let's just say for argument's sake, someone just put the dumbest idea in the world on the table, rather than being like, God, that's a dumb idea. That's not being respectful to the other person, but asking a series of questions about how they arrived at that assumption is something that I often do. Well, how
mm.
did you get to that data point? Or how did you arrive at that conclusion? Because I'm genuinely curious. I want to know. So I think that that's another way to embrace conflict as a leader, even if you think it's the dumbest idea on the planet.
I love it. So I just want to read from Colby McElroy, who's sharing in the chat. Passion fuels anger.
Mhm.
Angry employees drive innovation out of passion if guided correctly. And I think that's so important. That I think as leaders, it can be irritating to have somebody on our team that we might think of as a whiner, or somebody we might think of as perpetually dissatisfied. And I think of those folks in some ways as canaries in the coal mine, right?
Mhm.
They may be irritable. It may be that they have a character flaw. It's also true that what they're sensitive about is very likely not nothing. That other
Mhm.
people may also be starting to feel that irritation. They just don't have as low a threshold to bring it up. And so these canaries in the coal mine can point out for you where you need to be making change, where you need to be making innovation in order to nip that irritation in the bud before it really becomes a significant problem. So
I take a slightly different take on that, which is that feedback sometimes is really telling you about the priorities and the
mm,
preferences of the person giving it.
true
Now,
story.
if it fits into the larger plan, if this is your target audience and you're not hitting your target audience, then I think you absolutely 100% need to listen to the canary in the coal mine. But if it's not your target audience, then I don't know that I necessarily need to integrate that. But
Definitely.
for another, I love scripts. I love having a script as in response to that, which is makes sense, but I need to pressure test that first.
Mm,
And that's a way of sort of I need to think about that one.
yeah, great. Well, Joya, we've gone back and forth a couple of times. I don't know if we've gotten to your second bullet, but
Yeah.
have we?
Well, the second bullet is, and this is kind of germane to the first one that I said, but we can always take a break.
Mm,
I was in conversation with Indonuyi 2 weeks ago, and one of the questions that I asked her is, how do you gracefully handle a put down or rejection of your idea?
mm,
And so I'm going to actually repurpose what she said is that it is 100% okay to say, you know what, I need to take a break. You take a break, go outside, take 2 minutes, get your druthers about you, and then come back in and think about a creative way to say the same point in a different way. You know what I said earlier maybe didn't land. So let me try saying it in another way.
mm,
And maybe
yeah.
you might have to do that a couple of times, but I think that sometimes getting to the resolution means that you've got to be able to say the same things 100 different ways and then be ready to walk away. I mean, there might come a point where it's just like, all right, we got to table this for today. But I think that it's perfectly within the realm of reason to go outside and take a break.
And so how do you think you can do that? How do you take a break gracefully?
I need 2 minutes. I'm going to
Mm,
go outside. And I will be back.
I
Simple as
think
that.
I love that you gave essentially I'm going to the penalty box and here's how long I'm going to be there. And I
Yeah.
think that part is so important to say. It's going to be 2 minutes. It's going to be 5 minutes. It's going to be 5 hours. Let's talk about this even next week. I got to table this until next week. But giving somebody a a a clear, definitive end is so important to their sense of safety and stability, so that they know so that they're not left wondering, okay, has Joya gone off and she's stewing? How long is this going to go on? When is it appropriate for me to say, hey, Joya, can we continue that conversation? And if you tell me when we're going to come back to it, then that really helps to put all of those concerns at risk.
And so much of leadership is managing expectations, right? What we're really talking about here is how do you manage everybody's expectations? I remember interviewing Fran Hauser, who wrote a book called The Myth of the Nice Girl. And the takeaway from her book is that you can be a strong leader and still be nice. And I remember her citing this example where she was in a room with her entire team and someone that was a little bit senior to her. And he made an off-color comment about her skirt. And she was like, can we take 2 minutes outside? And she called him out. And the guy didn't even realize that he was making an off-color remark. But she took that outside because she didn't think it was okay to have a showdown in the room in front of her team. Took him outside and said, you know what? I can't do my best work if I'm going to be on the receiving end of comments like this. The guy totally didn't even realize he was out of line. He was like, I'm so sorry. And then they went back into the room as a united front and continued with the meeting. But I think that there's merit in also going out of the room because you may not even realize that you're not on the same page.
What I really appreciate in what she said, I can't do my best work. There's no accusation, right? It does put him on notice. There's no wiggle room here, right? It's not as if he can then go back into the room and continue, right? Because that just would be clearly foolhardy on his part. But to say, I can't do my best work does not have a tone of accusation, and so is less likely to put somebody on the defense.
Right, right.
One of our listeners or viewers, Ruth, is saying, I'm struggling with the concept of anger in the workplace. In her opinion, getting angry puts the other person in control. Exploring the differences of opinion and encouraging diverse opinions is vital. And I think leaders have no place getting angry, in particular at another employee. I think it's the responsibility of the leader to put out disagreements and explore the conflict. And I'm gonna agree and disagree at the same time. And I think, Ruth, you and I probably agree on the whole, right? That directing my anger at somebody, especially as a leader in the workplace, there is no place for that. To kind of step aside from the fact of my anger and observe it like I'm somebody else. It's not. I think Ruth, you probably have encountered the same experience that I have. That sometimes anger just wells up. There's a reason we say, although I think it's not true, Joya, you're making me angry, right? I'm choosing to be angry. That's the truth, and it comes up unbidden. It's not something that I have direct control over, but I do have control over what I do with that anger. Do I direct it at you, or do I simply observe it and then act out of care? Act out of responsibility to our shared purpose. So yes, it is absolutely inappropriate to direct your anger at others. And what did you say a little while ago, Joya? We're only human after all.
We're human, and you're also, because we're human, that other person might be angry at something that absolutely has nothing to do with you. Like maybe they just didn't sleep all night because their kid was up, have a newborn and they've been up all night. Like I've realized that so much of anger now, as I'm turning 50 this year, is really just a commentary on where that other person's at. It actually has very little to do with me. And so if you can see it for what it is, and again, the higher you go up on the leadership pyramid, I think the more you understand things like this and you're able to see it for what it is.
Right on. So we've heard your first two bullets. I'll move on to my bullet number 2.
Yeah.
And this is, it can be incredibly valuable to chase down the hard to find, not volunteered information. So one of the concepts that we talk about with the teams that we train and how to communicate and collaborate effectively together is to pick up on the nonverbal cues. So I will very often say things in a group, even 30 people in front of me, and I'll say, "Oh, I heard a breath over here. Was that you, Charlie? Tell me about that. What were you about to say?"
Mhm.
Or, um, there was a time that with my daughter's nanny many years ago, where we were planning to meet. We were on the phone together talking about where are we going to meet and do a handoff of my daughter.
Mhm.
It wasn't going to be at home today, and so we agreed on an exit. We agreed on the Nisqually exit, and she said, "Where
Mhm.
should we meet?" And I said, "How about at the golf course at the lower parking lot on the left?" And she
Mhm.
said, "Okay," and was just about to hang up. I said, "Hang
Mhm.
on, hang on, hang on. Your words said okay. Your tone didn't leave me confident that you actually know where I'm talking about." And she said, "Yeah, I actually have no idea where even the golf course is." I said, "Okay,
Mhm.
well, where's a spot that you know?" And she said, "Well, I know the Chevron parking lot." She was thinking of a completely different exit.
Oh
And then
boy.
when I got to the Chevron parking lot, she was not there on time, and she was not there 5
Mm.
minutes later, and I started to call her 5 minutes later. She was not there 10 minutes later. She was not there 15 minutes later. But at least I knew I was in the right spot. And when she did finally arrive, she said, "I'm so sorry that my phone battery died."
Mhm.
Now imagine if I had been sitting at a completely different exit in a parking lot waiting for her, and her phone battery was dead, and she never would have arrived, and I would
Yeah.
have lost my ever loving mind.
Yeah. One of my members said to me today, "How can I be a better listener?" And
Mm,
I said, "One of my key things that I do now is for my own clarity and to recap, and I will go back and share what I thought I heard, because I think that gives somebody, much like your nanny, a moment in real time to correct me and my understanding of what I just heard." And
mhm.
I do that now all the time, from everything from like the delivery guy to, my partner, to recap, this is what I heard. And that way you can course correct in real time if there's any misunderstanding as to what it is, that information that was being transmitted in that moment.
Absolutely. One of the CEOs that I work with, her thoughts and emotions are written all across her face, and they can sometimes move across her face very rapidly. And
Yeah.
so I will often say to her, "Hey, what was that face?" So I'm seeing information, and most of the time I'm not arrogant enough to think that I know what that face meant. So by
Mhm.
asking, what did that facial expression mean? What was behind that? You can dig out some of the hidden information that is incredibly valuable. And it's the leaders that do this that I find are least often surprised by
Mhm.
negative information that they could have, should have, would have wanted to have days, weeks, months earlier. But they're asking these questions, and getting into what somebody maybe thought wasn't worth saying, or what they thought might not be fully appropriate to share.
Mhm.
There's gold in those hills.
The question I always like to end every interview. I mean, I spent many years interviewing CEOs at the Nasdaq or the New York Stock Exchange, and if I felt like the interview was done, but there was something, there was probably more gold on the other side, I will always ask, "What should I have asked you that I didn't ask you?"
Mm,
And I still do that today when I'm interviewing anybody for a testimonial or I'm on a client engagement. What should I have asked you that I didn't ask you? And sometimes you're pleasantly surprised, and sometimes it's just crickets on the other side of that
yeah.
question. But it often puts people back on their haunches. But I think even in a situation of conflict, we're going back to my point number one, is that you can really drive with questions. So you're leaving everybody with their respect intact. You're coming from a
Mm.
place of genuine curiosity.
I so appreciate too that you keep bringing up the respect, right? You can have conflict, and I have a different definition of conflict than the one you began with. You began with conflict as anger. The definition of conflict that I'm working with is ideas, thoughts, desires, intentions that seem, at least on the surface, not to be congruent, or not to,
Mm,
or perhaps to be mutually exclusive.
hmm.
And so sometimes what happens when you embrace conflict is that you discover that what seemed impossible to reconcile, the more you learn about it, the more it can be reconciled. And so, I think, for example, there's an I don't know if it's a true story, but two two villages in conflict over this fruit. There's a limited supply of this crop, and they're only conflicting about the fruit. We should have it. No, we should have it. And then when they get into why, what are your motivations? What is it that this fruit offers? They learned that the one group actually wanted to use or eat the meat of the fruit, and the other group wanted the rind or the husk of the fruit for some other purpose. And so only by embracing that conflict and leaning into it and learning more about it are they able to discover that there isn't actually an irreconcilable difference here.
Right. I think what you're really talking about is, what is it that people value? I do this exercise with my members, and I did it during my workshop, which is I gave a list of 50 values. And I said, all right, I need you to pick 10. Then I want you to narrow it down to 5. And I want you to narrow it down to 2. Now, when I first did the exercise, those 2 values are ideally who I am when you strip out work. So yes, there was excellent. Yes, there was integrity. Yes, there was security. But my top 2 ended up being adventure and beauty. And so when I look at my workday and I see that I'm feeling out of alignment, well, what elements of adventure and beauty did not make it into my day? So similarly, you can do this with families. One of my members loves to do this with her family. They'll go away for a weekend, rent a house, and then every member of the family has to share what their values are. And I think that this is something that you could do in the workplace as an open conversation. What do you value? Because I think that could speak volumes about the POV of where that person is coming from and has been coming from this entire time. What is it this person really values at the end of the day? You might think it's one thing, but it's actually another. It might shed some light on why you're constantly in conflict.
Yeah. So important that again, it comes down to, what are you afraid of? Very often when we're feeling conflicted or in conflict is because we're afraid that one of those values is going to be demoted or going to be stripped away. Very, very important. So Joya, what is your third?
My next point. You were saying that, anger just wells up, conflict just wells up, and there's no way to really head it off. But I actually would say that you can be proactive. And there's a reason why a lot of the top leaders in the world have a meditation practice, because that is, again, we're going back to the brain and the amygdala. When all those chemicals are pulsing through your brain, you really have kind of lost control. But to kind of reset and come back to a logical place, meditation can do wonderful, wonderful things. And what happens during meditation is that your brain forms new neurons after the 20-minute mark. And those neurons have no memory of what has happened to you before. So you come to any problem, any solution, any conflict with a whole arsenal of new decision-making power because of that meditation practice. And then if you do that every day, it starts to compound on itself. So you can, as a leader, if you have a pretty steady meditation practice, be proactive about how you're going to head off that anger, because you can kind of see the situation for what it is.
I love that. I think of meditation. I always think about these storm drains near a school where I used to teach that would get clogged with leaves. And then, of course, when it rained, the clogged drains would just create these floods because they prevented the water from draining out. I think of meditation as being able to kind of take out some of those clogs, right? Help let those emotions just flow through much more readily. The first little tricklings of anger are able to drain out when you're meditating regularly, because your brain is in good health. And when I think when we don't have that quiet, then we don't have as healthy a capacity to let those things drain through, and we're more likely to overflow.
We're really talking about cultivating empathy and compassion. I said earlier that I can now see people for what they are, as opposed to taking it personally when someone's kind of losing their SHIT. And again, I think that this is a byproduct of me adopting a meditation practice. And I think as a leader, Ruth had said it earlier, like, where does anger really have its place in the workplace? I don't know that, all eyes are on you. Like I said, I was reading Indra Nooyi's book, and she remembers when she became CEO, even more eyes were on her. And so she really had to be very measured in what she let slip through when she was making big decisions or on the receiving end of a lot of criticism, because she was, a woman CEO too. So there was other factors that were being launched her way. And so I just think that's really interesting, that you've got to develop a good poker face. But I think meditation can be a proactive way to make that poker face pretty bulletproof.
Yeah. And even, because there isn't such a storm going on inside, right? When there
Yeah.
isn't such a storm going on inside, then it's a lot easier to maintain that outward equanimity. I
All right.
want
Your
to take a
next
moment.
point.
I want to take a moment and just say to Lorraine, who's ferociously typing wonderful comments,
Oh,
that it's always fantastic to have you here. Always good to see you, and thank you for your contributions. So my third point, and I think that it probably is very well supported, Joya, by your suggestion that we meditate.
mm-hmm.
My third point is allow internal conflict. And what I mean by that is that, we want to resolve conflict as quickly as we can, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you say A and I'm thinking not A, B, then my tendency is to try to get to a resolution as quickly as possible. Getting to a resolution might include my saying, well, I'm the boss, so we're doing B, right? That simply asserting my role power is a way to create a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easy to disagree. It's harder to understand. And to come back to what you said a few times about leaving people with their respect, their leaving people. I think about the word dignity.
Yeah.
Leaving people with their dignity intact. If I take the time to understand where you are coming from, to understand why you want A, to understand what you value and why A is important to you,
Mm-hmm.
then to disagree and invite you to share is going to leave you with more dignity. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
require me to contemplate my position a little bit more fully. And if I can allow myself to change, wow, then I'm really, that is a level of, I think, interpersonal skill. If I can be changed by your argument, then
Mm-hmm.
that's really something. And it requires a certain embracing of internal conflict to do that, because you're going to have to go through that internal conflict and that discomfort in order to reassess, and in order to give yourself and your team the grace of being persuadable. So that requires going through conflict. And then if I still at the end of the day say, Joya, thank you for sharing that with me, I always want to hear your contrasting opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go with B for X and Y reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a much better place. And that also requires me to put myself through the internal conflict of trying on your perspective.
But let's say things get heated, and they do. Again, like I think that I love what Ruth is saying. Help me understand what you're thinking.
Right
Again, those
on.
questions are always a great way to kind of dig beneath the surface and see what the motivation is. But I think that, again, I'm a big fan of scripts. If things are getting heated, let's table this and revisit this tomorrow. It's important to me and I want to resolve it. So you're not dismissing what's happening, but you are saying, you know what, let's cool our heels.
Yeah.
And let's revisit this once we got our druthers about us. But it's important to me that we resolve this. So you're not making it that it's a frivolous thing.
Absolutely. Earlier you mentioned setting expectations, right? You said everything we're talking about is setting expectations. And what I think a lot of teams and leaders do is they jump right into working on the problem before setting the expectation together of here is how we are going to make this decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so there can often be this struggle between contrasting and irreconcilable expectations that I expect I'm going to have an equal voice, perhaps, right? Or that the majority is going to rule, or who knows? There are all kinds of different ways that we might have different expectations. So to take the question or the problem, set it aside and say, okay, have a meta discussion, if you will, right? Here's how we're going to create ideas, evaluate those ideas, narrow them down. And at the end of the day, here's how the decision is going to be made, right? Some leaders will say, Jerry, I'm going to give you lots of input. And at the end of the day, Jerry, you're going to make the decision. I respect that very much, right? Or Linda, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and talk to 3 different people. Here are the people I'd like you to go talk to, get their input. At the end of the day, it's going to be your decision. Yeah. Or I want you to come back to me, Linda, and give me a report and then make your recommendation. And then I'm going to make the decision. But we have this, we lay out the roadmap of how the decision is going to be made so that people don't feel bait and switched whenever the decision is finally made and however the decision is finally made.
Yeah. And I think also you're making an informed decision, right? You're not making a decision out of just passion or anger. Right. You're laying down the bumper guards and creating space for innovation. I think someone said that in the chat. Yeah. I remember being at a Bloomberg Business Week forum and they were interviewing several CEOs. And I think it was the CEO of Castle who had said that there is actual sanctioned time on the company calendar for open brainstorming. And sometimes there might be nothing that comes out of that conversation. And maybe there's one really, really great idea that takes the company forward that comes out of those conversations. Either way, there has to be sanctioned time for this open brainstorming. And those might get heated and conflicted, but at least you created the space and some bumper guards around when that happened. Mark Randolph, who's the co-founder of Netflix, and Reed Hastings, in the very early days of the founding of that company, the way Netflix came about is that those 2 men would drive to the valley together on Mondays, and that was their sanctioned brainstorming time to ideate around whatever it is that they wanted to create next. And Netflix truly came out of those weekly Monday sessions. So I don't know that, we do enough to kind of create open time or free time to be able to ideate and have open conflict, as opposed to, okay, this is the agenda. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this.
I think also there's a lot of talk about the retreat, the company retreat or the leadership retreat as being wasteful. But the truth is, there's fascinating research that says that, Joya, tonight, when you go into your own bathroom and brush your teeth, you're going to do the exact same thing that you always do, right? You'll take you'll start at the outside of the top right, and you'll move across, and then you'll go to the inside of the top left and you'll move across, and then you'll do that same thing in reverse on the bottom. I don't know if that's how you do it, right? But that you do, as most of us do, the exact same process every night. But then you go to a hotel room or you're a guest in somebody else's house and you have different visual and kinesthetic cues around you. And suddenly you're brushing your teeth differently. And I experienced this just recently when I went off to a retreat with a leadership team to do some innovation and problem solving work with them. And I wasn't even thinking about this research. I just noticed, hey, here I am in a hotel and I'm brushing my teeth differently from the way that I usually do. Yeah. So this is a long-winded way of saying getting out of your usual boardroom, getting out of maybe your home office and your usual Zoom meeting, and having a different environment with different visual and kinesthetic cues can give you a different perspective that can help crack open a tricky problem.
Colby has a thought here. She says, are we managing expectations through conversation? She struggles with this. I would say that for me, managing expectations is, let's say, Aaron, you and I conclude a conversation and I have an action item that I need to get back to you on. I don't like to leave it open-ended. I like to say, I'm going to manage your expectations. I'm going to put a tick mark on my calendar and I'm going to get back to you by next Wednesday. That to me is having managed your expectations. So you're not left wondering out in the ether, when does she plan on getting back to me? So yes, that is a degree of conversation, but that's also managing your expectations.
Yeah, conversation, email. I mean, we've got so many tools, Asana, right, or some other
Mhm.
project management software, there are lots of ways to be setting and reiterating, repeating repeating the communication, right?
And it can be something,
The
it
folks
can
at
be as
Manager
simple as,
Tools. Sorry, go ahead,
yeah.
Joya.
Well, I was just going to say, it can be something as simple, like it's something that I'm in the habit of doing. And again, this harkens back to my television days. If someone sends me something, I immediately write back received. Or
Mhm.
if they've asked me something and I don't know the answer in that moment, I'll say received, stand by, right? It means that I've gotten your communication. I'm not sitting here, planning my next trip to Hawaii. I'm acting on it, but I do need a little bit of time. I'm in receipt of what you sent me. So I feel like a lot of people don't even have conflict resolution skills. They don't even
Mhm.
have the managing expectation skills. And it can be something as simple as got your note, we'll get back to you at X time.
Yeah. Another the folks at Manager Tools, which is a wonderful podcast, say if you tell your team something 7 times, then half of them will tell you that they heard it once.
Yeah.
So we've got to be repeating our expectations with patience, not with impatience, right? But to be repeating our expectations regularly, frequently, patiently.
Yeah. And it goes back
It's
to
a
what I was saying. You
it's
got
a
to be
part of
creative.
leadership.
You have to be creative about saying the same thing in several different times. All right. My last point
Before you
is,
get to your last point,
oh,
Joya,
yeah.
I just
Yes.
want to give you an opportunity to tell people how and why they might get a hold of you.
Oh, absolutely. Well, my business is an executive leadership platform for women. And because I've been a news anchor for 20 years, most women come to me for public speaking training. So the next cohort of my public speaking masterclass kicks off on February 16th. And you can email me at joya@joyadas.com, or you can go to my website, which is joyadas.com, to learn all about it. But this is really for a woman that wants to build a personal brand and isn't quite sure where her personal stories fit into
Mm.
her leadership. We're going to really workshop that.
I love that, putting our person, we are people. We are people first and foremost.
Yeah.
And I think the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion, at least in part, is so much about actually coming to work as a whole person, and that includes our stories. So I'm
Mhm.
very excited that you're doing that, and I wish I was a woman right now so that I could take it with you. So Joya, your fourth and final bullet point for folks.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are times that we as leaders are going to get angry. Again, we're only human. But I think that if you do lose your you know what in front of the group,
Mm.
it's important to get out in front of it. I've seen parents do this. Like, you know what, son, I'm sorry I lost it on you. I shouldn't have done that. And I don't know that the office can be any different. Hey, you know what? I lost my cool the other day. I shouldn't have done that.
Mm.
This is an important issue to me. So let's talk about it. I think that, just getting out in front of your anger after it's already happened is a sign of good leadership as well.
I got nothing to add to that.
That
I'm
takes
with
some
you.
cojones, though. It takes some courage to be able to do
Yes.
that.
Yeah, it surely does. I think people mistakenly believe that to show that vulnerability is a sign of weakness,
Mm,
and quite the opposite, right? I mean, we all have experienced the kind of internal challenge that it can be to own our mistakes in public, and so we know from having struggled with that what a sign of strength it is.
I often have women enroll in my masterclass thinking that they're coming seeking confidence. And what they leave with is courage.
Mm,
But I don't think they know that right
mm,
off the bat, that that's what they're going to be cultivating over the 6 weeks that we're going to be working together.
I love that. So it seems we both have a program that's launching on February 16th.
Oh, what's yours?
Mine, we're calling a manager's upskilling sprint. It's 8
Mhm.
weeks with one brief meeting a week for managers to get a science-backed system for effectively managing people. We're
Mm,
almost all of us are short-staffed right now, so this is going to give you the ability to drive performance, to get the best that you can out of the team that you have, while
mm.
simultaneously building strong relationships of trust, that make people want to stick around for the long haul. So we're covering 6 topics, 6 tools for leaders to use: a model for effective feedback, a model for delegation, a model for how to conduct effective one-on-ones, and that's a model for how to inspire accountability instead of breaking people's desire to be accountable to you. So those are just a few of the topics that we're covering. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Aaron Schmookler on LinkedIn, and I'm sure my profile is around here somewhere. And my last bullet before we call it a day, is the phrase, and it ties in, I think, to a lot of what we've talked about before. Tell me more about that. And I think there was somebody in the comments who, I'm scrolling up here, Ruth said, help me understand what you are thinking. And this is, speaking of scripts, Joya, right? I know you like scripts. It's a script that I love to use when I think when my brain is telling me that somebody is totally off base.
Yeah.
Right. It's a stopgap. It is a safety that I use because I am a fast moving, fast judging kind of leader. Right. And sometimes that's really an asset. And sometimes it really gets me into trouble, both because it can mean that I make bad decisions about the action, and it can also mean that I deteriorate relationships. So I've made it a discipline. Anytime I am quick to go, that's nuts, to keep my mouth shut for a moment, take a breath, and say, tell me more about that. Help me understand. And that does a couple of things. Is it helps leave people's dignity intact. It is an act of respect for them. And it also gives me an opportunity to learn, because it turns out none of us really, we don't work with idiots. We work with people with excellent minds, with unique and valuable perspectives. And that script gives me the opportunity, and it will give you the opportunity as well, to learn where they're coming from, to learn about their perspective, to learn where I'm wrong oftentimes.
Well, you're not functioning on an assumption. When you're asking that
right.
question, someone today was like, well, I really want to have more fun. I was like, all right, well, tell me more about that. Because fun can be a lot of things. It can be, going to a tequila bar. It can be, whale watching. What does that mean for you? I need to tell me more.
Yeah, for me, fun sometimes is grappling together with a really hard business problem, right? We're in the boardroom, or we're in the conference room, struggling together with this problem. So, and of course that's without angry kinds of conflict. I find that fun. With productive kinds of conflict, I really find that fun. So you're absolutely right that fun can mean different things to different people. And what is fun for me may be torture for you.
But I think what we've concluded here today is that, culture starts with hire number one. The first person you hire starts to determine the culture of your company. So what is it that you can do from the top down to make sure that your culture suggests that you are open to conflict, but at the end of the day, leaving everybody with their dignity and their respect intact once the conflict has been hashed out and workshopped?
Well, that brings me to mind of maybe a bonus, a ninth thought about how to improve your culture by embracing conflict, is to make conflict, exploring somebody's style of conflict, a part of your interview process. Ask yourself, do you want to hire people who are conflict avoidant? Do you want to hire people who are who engage in role power anytime that there's a difference with one of their direct reports? Or do you want to hire people who are conflict embracing, and people who welcome disagreement from their teams, and show people the kind of respect that you and I have been talking about today, Joya?
That one of my members is a leader, and she remembers going on maternity leave, and she had done a 360 review while she was still in the office, and all of her direct reports had really wonderful things to say about her. And then she went away on maternity leave, and there was another review that was done, and guess what? Not everything was so glowing. And so she realized that she had to really change and have a conversation about why they weren't being forthcoming while she was in the office, but why they were so forthcoming when she was out of the office. So when she returned from maternity leave, she made it her business first and foremost to sit down with all those people and be like, all right, what do I need to change in order to make you feel more, productive, or whatever it is that you need right now?
Wow, Ruth just hit us with a doozy of a question that we don't have time to address. But she asked, how do you help people get comfortable with conflict? And so maybe we can each take a half a minute with that, Joya, and call that the final word.
I think the way you can get comfortable is by asking questions. We've been hitting on that the entire time. You're not saying I disagree with you, but I am curious about how you arrived at that conclusion.
Yeah, I think inviting disagreement, inviting negative, that was my first bullet, is inviting disagreement and negative feedback, and then rewarding people for giving it. Because we
Yes.
all come to our jobs with the experience of our history. And most of us have had terrible bosses. Maybe not only, but we've had at least some terrible bosses. And so leaders are dangerous. And you're dangerous because you're armed with a gun with bullets that say you're fired, and you can never put that gun down. So there's an imbalance of power, and you can't do anything about it. What you can do is reward people for the behaviors that you want, and you can keep your hands off the gun. And what I mean by that is not bringing role power to bear, not bringing threat to bear unless absolutely necessary. I think we're going to have to leave it at that so that Joya, you can get on to your next meeting, and so can I. And I just want to say thank you so much, Joya. I've had a really great time having this conversation with you.
It's really so great.
I want to thank to all of you who have contributed with your thoughts in the chat, whether we have been able to read them out loud or just allow them to be a visual part of the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, Joya, especially thanks to you for joining me and offering some really valuable conversation to the folks who have come
Aaron.
to hear.
May the force be with you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
That made my day. May the force be with you as well. And good luck with, have a wonderful time with your cohort in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.